Isabella Grant had always been the kind of woman people admired. She wasn't born into wealth or privilege, but she carried herself with a quiet grace that made her stand out in every room she entered. She was intelligent, kind-hearted, and endlessly ambitious. By the age of 28, she had carved a name for herself in the publishing industry, building her own literary agency from scratch. Authors adored her for believing in their words when no one else did, and critics respected her for her eye for talent. But behind her polished smile, Isabella's life hadn't been easy. She had fought through years of rejection, loneliness, and financial struggles before she tasted success. When she finally found stability, she thought the worst battles of her life were over. What she didn't know was that the greatest betrayal was waiting for her, hidden in the smile of the man she trusted most. That man was Adrian Cole. Charming, sophisticated, and persuasive, Adrian walked into Isabella's life as a friend first, then as a partner, and eventually as the closest person she had. He was everything she thought she needed: a strong business mind, a confidant who supported her dreams, and someone who made her believe she wasn't alone anymore. With Adrian by her side, Isabella felt unstoppable. Together, they turned her small agency into one of the fastest-growing publishing firms in New York. Everyone in the industry began to speak of Isabella and Adrian as the golden duo. For years, Isabella worked tirelessly, pouring her soul into the company. Every decision she made was transparent, every success she celebrated with her team. But what Isabella didn't see was Adrian's growing hunger for power. While she was focused on building dreams, Adrian was plotting to take them all away. He had always envied the way people respected her, how her name shone brighter than his. And he knew there was only one way to erase her: by destroying her completely. The betrayal came like a storm. One morning, Isabella arrived at her office, to find chaos: her employees whispering, her assistant avoiding her eyes, and a dozen unread messages on her phone. When she walked into the conference room, her heart dropped. Adrian was sitting at the head of the table, surrounded by board members and lawyers. On the table lay documents filled with accusations: fraud, embezzlement, betrayal of trust. Every paper bore Isabella's forged signature. Every transaction had been twisted to make her look guilty. She tried to speak, to defend herself, but Adrian's voice cut through the silence with chilling calmness. "It's over, Isabella. You've been exposed." The words echoed in her ears like a death sentence. Within hours, the company she had bled for was ripped from her hands. The media swarmed outside, branding her a thief, a liar, a criminal. Friends she thought would stand by her disappeared overnight. Investors demanded answers. Authors pulled their manuscripts, and the world turned its back on her. Adrian had not only taken her company, he had stolen her reputation, her dignity, her life's work. That night, Isabella sat alone in her apartment, her world in ruins. The headlines screamed her downfall. The city lights outside seemed cruel, and for the first time in years, she felt powerless. But as the tears dried on her cheeks, something inside her began to shift. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, broken, humiliated, and betrayed. Yet beneath the pain, she saw something Adrian had overlooked: her strength, her fire. Her silence was not weakness, it was the calm before a storm. With a steady voice, she whispered to herself, "He thinks he's destroyed me, but Adrian Cole has no idea what I'm capable of." That night, Isabella Grant made a vow. She would rise from the ashes he left her in. And when she returned, her revenge would be silent, precise, and unforgettable. Isabella Grant disappeared from the spotlight after her downfall. The woman who had once been on the cover of business magazines was now invisible to the world. For months, she lived in silence, avoiding the media, ignoring the whispers, and cutting herself off from the city that had celebrated her rise and feasted on her fall. To the world, Isabella was finished, a broken woman buried under the weight of scandal. But in her isolation, Isabella was not collapsing. She was rebuilding. Every night, she would sit in her dimly lit apartment with stacks of old files, journals, and research spread out before her. She studied every detail of Adrian's betrayal: how he forged her signature, how he manipulated board members, how he planted evidence to make her look guilty. The more she uncovered, the clearer it became that Adrian's downfall would not come through anger or public confrontation. It would come through patience, intelligence, and precision. Isabella understood something most people overlooked. Revenge is not about speed. True revenge is an art, crafted carefully until the target never sees it coming. Adrian had stolen her company, her reputation, and her life's work, but he had also given her something in return: the power of silence. While he celebrated his stolen victory, Isabella prepared in the shadows. She began with herself. Broken women don't scare men like Adrian, but strong women do. She forced herself out of bed at dawn, running through empty streets until her lungs burned. She trained her mind with books on strategy, law, and psychology. She rebuilt her confidence piece by piece, like a sculptor shaping stone. The timid Isabella, who once trusted too easily, was gone. In her place was someone colder, sharper, and far more dangerous. Then came the allies. Isabella knew she couldn't take Adrian down alone. She began reaching out to people quietly, those who had been wronged by him. Those who whispered about his corruption but had never dared to fight back. A former employee fired unjustly. A business partner cheated in a deal. A young writer whose manuscript Adrian had stolen. One by one, they came to her not because she asked, but because they saw in her eyes a determination they no longer had. She became the leader they needed, the voice they had been waiting for. With their help, Isabella started to collect evidence. Not the kind that would make headlines right away, but the kind that would build a case so strong it could crush Adrian completely. She traced offshore accounts, followed the paper trail of money he had hidden, and uncovered deals he had made under false identities. Every document, every recording, every witness was a brick in the fortress of her revenge. But Isabella's plan was not only about exposing Adrian, it was about taking back her life. She began quietly building a new company under a different name, far from the circles that once knew her. She scouted fresh talent, unpublished authors, and rising voices, who had been ignored by the industry. She offered them contracts, mentorship, and opportunities Adrian's firm would never give. Within a year, her hidden agency started producing bestsellers, gaining momentum in silence. The industry had no idea who was behind it, but everyone could feel the shift. Meanwhile, Adrian basked in the spotlight. He paraded around as the genius who had saved Isabella's company, giving interviews, attending galas, and boasting about his empire. He believed Isabella had been destroyed, forever, a ghost of the past. What he didn't know was that every step he took toward fame was only tightening the noose she was building around his neck. Isabella kept her distance, but she never stopped watching him. She studied his patterns, his weaknesses, his arrogance. She learned when he lied, when he slipped, when he grew careless. She knew that Adrian's greatest flaw was his belief that he was untouchable, and that flaw would be the weapon she used against him. Late at night, Isabella would stand by her window, looking out at the city lights. The pain of her past was still there, but it no longer controlled her. Instead, it fueled her. She wasn't just planning to reclaim her reputation, she was planning to destroy Adrian's completely. Let him shine, she whispered to herself. The brighter his light, the darker his fall will be. By the end of that year, Isabella was no longer the woman Adrian betrayed. She had transformed into something far stronger, far more dangerous. She wasn't the victim anymore. She was the storm waiting on the horizon, and when she struck, Adrian Cole would never see it coming. Adrian Cole stood at the top of the world, or, at least, that's what he believed. His company was thriving. His face appeared on magazine covers. And every gala, every award show, every red carpet seemed to belong to him. To the public, he was the golden boy of publishing. Charming, brilliant, unstoppable. But perfection is fragile. And beneath Adrian's polished surface, cracks had already begun to show. It started with whispers. At first, they were small rumors of mishandled contracts, employees complaining about unfair treatment, subtle questions about where certain funds had gone. Adrian brushed them off with his trademark smile, confident that his charm could silence doubt. And for a while, it worked. But Isabella knew him too well. She had built her revenge on those very cracks. And now, slowly, they were beginning to widen. Adrian's empire was not as solid as it looked. The offshore accounts Isabella had uncovered were bleeding money. But Adrian had no idea she had planted a trail for the authorities to follow. Fake investors appeared in his orbit, disguised allies of Isabella, offering deals too good to resist. Adrian's arrogance blinded him. He accepted, thinking he was outsmarting them, when in truth, he was walking straight into the trap. Meanwhile, Isabella's new company, still operating under a hidden name, was becoming a force he could no longer ignore. The industry buzzed about the mysterious agency that kept producing bestsellers, stealing market share from Adrian's firm. Every time he tried to lure away one of their authors, he failed. His frustration grew, though he would never admit it publicly. Behind closed doors, He began to rage, and then came the press. A journalist, one of Isabella's quiet allies, began digging into Adrian's past. Articles surfaced about questionable deals, lawsuits settled in silence. Stories of talented writers who had mysteriously vanished from the industry after crossing him. Each article was like a stone thrown at the flawless glass tower Adrian had built. He laughed them off in interviews, calling them jealous lies. But his laughter no longer reached his eyes. The public, once enchanted, began to watch him differently. Doubt had entered the conversation. And in business, doubt spreads faster than truth. Adrian's arrogance only deepened his problems. Instead of addressing the issues, he doubled down. He spent millions on unnecessary luxuries to prove his wealth, threw grander parties to display his power, and attacked critics with venom that only made him look guilty. The harder he tried to control the narrative, the more it slipped from his grasp. Isabella, watching from the shadows, remained silent. She didn't need to strike yet. Adrian was destroying himself, piece by piece. Every decision he made in desperation was another knot tightening around his neck. She had lit the fire, and now, he was feeding it with his own hands. But Adrian's real downfall began with betrayal from within his own empire. One of his closest executives, tired of his arrogance and fearful of sinking with him, secretly switched sides. Isabella had reached out months ago, planting the seed of doubt, and now that seed had blossomed. Documents, emails, recordings all leaked, all damning. The first major scandal broke when a news outlet revealed evidence of Adrian stealing manuscripts and publishing them under different names. Writers who had been silenced for years suddenly found their voices again, and the literary world erupted in outrage. Lawsuits piled up. Protesters appeared outside his offices. His polished reputation shattered almost overnight. Adrian raged against it all, convinced someone was orchestrating his ruin, and he wasn't wrong. But what he couldn't see, what he refused to believe, was that the ghost of Isabella Grant was behind every headline, every betrayal, every whisper. She was everywhere and nowhere. Her fingerprints invisible but her presence undeniable. At night, Adrian began to lose sleep. He drank too much, yelled too often, trusted too little. The golden boy had become a paranoid man, snapping at shadows, desperate to find an enemy he could not name, and all the while, Isabella waited. She was patient, watching his empire collapse under the weight of truth. But she knew the final blow had yet to come. Adrian still had power, still had followers, still had the illusion of control. That illusion wouldn't last much longer, for Isabella was no longer satisfied with taking his company, or his reputation. She wanted something deeper. She wanted Adrian Cole to know exactly who had brought him down. And when the moment was right, she would step out of the shadows and look him in the eye so he would never forget the name Isabella Grant. Adrian Cole's empire was ashes. The offices that once buzzed with activity were half empty, abandoned by employees who no longer believed in him. His name, once synonymous with brilliance, had become a stain whispered with disgust. Headlines called him a fraud, a thief, a tyrant. The investors, who once threw money at his ventures, now demanded refunds. The lawsuits stacked higher than his trophies ever had. For the first time in his life, Adrian Cole was alone, but one question burned inside him, louder than all the scandals, sharper than every betrayal. Who had done this to him? Who had pulled the strings, orchestrated his destruction so flawlessly? The answer came one quiet evening. Adrian sat in his penthouse, the city lights flickering through the glass walls. When the elevator chimed, he frowned. Nobody was supposed to visit. Slowly, he rose, glass of whiskey in hand, and turned toward the sound of footsteps. And then he froze, standing in the doorway. Calm and composed was Isabella Grant. Adrian's blood ran cold. For a heartbeat, he thought he was seeing a ghost. The woman he had buried professionally and socially was alive, stronger than ever, her presence commanding the room like a storm contained in human form. "Hello, Adrian," Isabella said, softly, her voice steady, almost kind. "It's been a long time." His jaw clenched. "You," he hissed, "you're behind this." Isabella didn't deny it. She stepped further inside, her heels clicking against the marble floor, her eyes never leaving his. "You took everything from me once. My career, my name, my dignity. Did you really think I would disappear forever?" Adrian's arrogance flickered only for a moment before his mask returned. "You're insane if you think you've won. I'll rebuild. I always rebuild." But Isabella only smiled. "Rebuild? With what? Your reputation is gone. Your investors have abandoned you. Your writers despise you. The world finally sees you for what you are. There's nothing left for you to rebuild. Her words cut deeper than any headline ever could because Adrian knew they were true. For all his bravado, he had nothing left. His empire was dust, his allies, traitors, his future ruined. You think you're better than me? He snarled, stepping closer. You destroyed me, Isabella. You're no different. For the first time, her expression softened not with pity, but with clarity. The difference, Adrian, is that I never needed to lie, cheat, or steal to succeed. I gave the world my words, my truth. And you tried to silence me because you were afraid of it. Adrian's hand shook around his glass. He wanted to throw it, to scream, to claw back control, but the weight of his failure pressed down on him, until he could hardly stand. Isabella, however, stood tall, her revenge complete, her spirit unbroken. She had risen from the ashes he left her in, and in doing so, she had proven something Adrian could never accept. He had never truly beaten her. This is your ending. Adrian, she said quietly, turning toward the door. Remember it well. Remember my name. Because the world will never forget it again. Adrian staggered back. The silence of the penthouse, louder than any applause he once received. For the first time, the great Adrian Cole felt the true weight of defeat. Not at the hands of rivals, not at the claws of scandal, but at the quiet, unstoppable strength of the woman he thought he had destroyed. Isabella left without looking back. The night swallowed her, the city lights painting her silhouette as she disappeared into the world she had reclaimed. For her, this was not just revenge, it was justice. And Adrian Cole, once untouchable, was left standing in the ruins of his own arrogance, haunted by the woman who had risen higher than he ever dreamed. The story of Adrian Cole had ended, but the legacy of Isabella Grant had just begun.